Nobody truly believed the SR-71 could outrun its own legend, until, in a darkened overseas bar, Lieutenant Colonel Gil Berles quietly admitted he had flown faster than any record allowed. His words echoed between empty glasses and Cold War secrets. In that moment, the boundary between myth and fact slipped away, and a different story began to be told about the Blackbird. But how did a machine built to just survive at the edge of space, held together by titanium that grew an inch in midair, truly defy its limits? When a missile rose from the Mediterranean beneath him, what speed did he risk dialing in, knowing the cockpit might never forgive him? The truth, long hidden by shadows and adrenaline, begins at the threshold where pilots once touched the face of God. The horizon bends in a way that does not belong to Earth. Gil Berles remembers the first time he looked out from the cockpit at 80,000 feet. The sky above had turned a deep, impossible indigo, so dark it threatened to swallow the sun. Below, the world's surface curved away, continents shrinking to shapes on a globe. There was no blue left in the air, only the sharp line where atmosphere surrendered to space. The Blackbird's canopy reflected the faint glow of instruments, but outside, the light faded fast. At this altitude, the sun could rise and set in the span of a turn, painting the edge of the world with a thin band of fire. Up here, the air is so thin that even sound seems to vanish. The suit's oxygen hiss is a constant reminder. One misstep and the void wins. The temperature outside drops to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, colder than the coldest winter, but the Blackbird's skin runs hot, heated by friction until the titanium expands and the seams seal tight. Pilots called this place the edge of forever. John Gillespie McGee's words to touch the face of God felt less like poetry and more like a simple fact. For Berles, every mission began with this view. The world's secrets laid bare, the sky above not blue but black. Before the speed, before the danger, there was always this, an astronaut's vista, earned not by rocket, but by a machine built for the impossible. Inside the cockpit, Gil Berles's world shrank to the hiss of oxygen and the press of the partial pressure suit against his skin. The helmet, locked tight, fed a steady stream of diluted oxygen, 6 liters per minute, just enough to keep his brain sharp at an altitude where the atmosphere thinned to almost nothing. Every breath was rationed by a regulator designed for the edge of space, where a single failure meant blackout in seconds. The suit itself was more than clothing. It was a life raft, holding his body together against an environment that could boil blood if the pressure dropped. The temperature outside hovered near minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with the environmental controls working, the sensation of cold seeped in through layers of Nomex and Mylar, a reminder of how thin the line was between survival and disaster. The cockpit's climate was kept near 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but the suit's gloves and boots sometimes failed to keep up, leaving fingers and toes numb after hours at altitude. Berles's hands rested on the controls, gloved and steady, but he could feel the isolation closing in. The Blackbird's canopy was a bubble of glass and titanium, separating him from the void. In that silence, the only company was the pulse in his ears and the mechanical rhythm of oxygen flowing. Technology could push the body higher than nature ever intended, but it could not erase the awareness of just how far from home he had flown. The suit, the helmet, the oxygen, they were the only things keeping him tethered to life at the edge of the world. On the ground, the SR-71 looked unfinished, panels gapped, metal seams visible, and dark stains pooling beneath its belly. The engineers at Lockheed Skunk Works had chosen titanium for a reason. At Mach 3, frictional heating pushed the Blackbird's skin to over 600 degrees Fahrenheit. The titanium frame would expand as much as 1 foot, stretching the entire airframe until those gaps vanished and the seams sealed tight. This was no accident. Kelly Johnson's team knew that aluminum would melt and steel was too heavy. Only titanium, sourced covertly from the Soviet Union through a web of shell companies, could survive the relentless heat and stress of sustained supersonic flight. But titanium alone was not enough. The Blackbird's fuel, JP-7, had to be as unconventional as the airframe itself. Standard jet fuel would have vaporized or ignited long before reaching operational speeds. JP-7, custom blended for the Blackbird, had a flash point of 60 degrees Celsius, 22 degrees higher than commercial Jet A. That margin meant it could be pumped through the wings and fuselage as a coolant, absorbing heat from the engines and skin without catching fire. One engineer put it simply: JP-7 was so stable you could drop a lit match in a bucket and it would go out. On the ramp, the Blackbird leaked JP-7 until takeoff, fuel dripping onto the concrete because the cold, shrunken titanium did not yet fit together. Only at speed, when the metal swelled from the heat, did the Blackbird become whole. Every mission began with this ritual, topping off the tanks, watching the fuel run out as fast as it went in, trusting that once the throttles opened, the laws of physics would finally work in their favor. The ritual was a quiet, high-stakes choreography between man, machine, and chemistry. Trust was not optional. At Mach 3, the SR-71 engines became something other than jet turbines. They blurred the line between turbojet and ramjet, drawing in air at more than 2,000 miles per hour. The J58 engines relied on a system of movable inlet spikes, each one sliding forward or back up to 26 inches. These spikes controlled the shockwave, forcing incoming air to slow down before it reached the engine compressor. If the shockwave slipped, if it moved off the spike tip by even a fraction, the engine could unstart. In an instant, one side of the aircraft would lose thrust while the other kept pushing, sending the Blackbird into a violent yaw. Pilots described it as being kicked by a giant. One moment smooth, the next the cockpit slammed sideways with a force that could throw your head against the canopy. Burleson once told friends that an unstart at full throttle felt like hitting a wall at 2,000 miles per hour. The inlet system was the razor's edge on which the Blackbird's speed rested. The flight manual set a strict compressor temperature redline. Exhaust gas temperatures could not exceed 427 degrees Celsius. Push the throttle too far and the engine would overheat, risking catastrophic failure. But push too little and the aircraft would never outrun the threats rising from below. The shock on lip phenomenon, where the shockwave rode perfectly on the spike tip, was the only way to balance maximum speed with engine safety. Every acceleration was a gamble, each Mach number earned by threading this invisible needle. In the cockpit, Burleson's gloved hand hovered near the emergency controls, always ready for the sudden jolt that signaled an unstart. For the Blackbird crews, the inlet spikes were more than machinery. They were the difference between setting records and becoming a cautionary tale. The warning tone hit like a punch, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. Enemy radar had locked on. In the cockpit, Burleson's hand tightened around the throttles as his reconnaissance systems officer called out the spike. They had crossed into the Libyan threat zone, where Soviet-built SA-2 and SA-6 missiles waited for any sign of weakness. The Blackbird's defensive suite lit up, jamming enemy frequencies while Watson scanned for launch signatures. In these moments, survival depended on teamwork and nerve. Burleson pushed the throttles forward, feeling the J58 engine surge beneath him. For a few heartbeats, the speed crept past the manual's red line. Mach 3.3, then higher. The airframe shuddered as the titanium skin expanded, but the aircraft held together. Outside, the world blurred. At over 2,200 miles per hour, every second counted. The missiles could not close the distance. Their fuel would run out long before they reached the Blackbird. When the danger passed, Burleson and Watson traded a glance. No words, just the silent knowledge that speed and trust had kept them alive. Freedom of Information Act request, number 2026-00123, remains unresolved and unanswered, leaving gaps in the official record. The Air Force Historical Research Agency released only partial radar logs from Mediterranean sorties. The entries confirm missile tracking, but they redact speed readouts above Mach 3.3. Declassified mission debriefs echo the same pattern. Pilots describe sudden, evasive accelerations, yet telemetry sheets for these flights are missing or heavily censored. Aviation historian Peter Merlin notes that the flight manual set a maximum speed of Mach 3.3. He says this limit was not because the engines could not push harder, but to preserve the aircraft's margin of safety. He adds that the lack of raw data above this limit is as telling as any published number. Where the documents fall silent, pilot testimony fills the void, credible but never fully confirmed. The evidence leaves a clear tension between what was recorded, what was redacted, and what was whispered long after the missions ended. Chapter break. Today, hypersonic ambitions drive new engineering races, but the SR-71 true limits remain partly classified and fiercely debated. As secrecy endures, so does the question: how much innovation still hides behind closed doors? Some legends, it seems, are engineered never to slow down. What do you think endures?